Welcome to Lesson 3.8, Assessing and Mitigating Mobile and Remote Computing Vulnerabilities. In your Candidate Information Bulletin, we are in the Security Engineering domain. We are in Key Area of Knowledge G, which is Assess and Mitigate Vulnerabilities in Mobile Systems. Our topics are going to include Mobile and Remote System Vulnerabilities, the OWASP Top 10, Mobile and Remote Acceptable Use Policies, and some NIST resources that I want you to be familiar with. So we're going to look at mobile and remote systems in this lesson. Mobile and remote, sometimes referred to as work from anywhere, computing systems are very disruptive technologies that we have transitioned from these boundary-based controlled environments, inside walls and locations that we can control, to potentially having our network extend to any device, any location, at any time. And that means that we have just blown out the walls, if you will, of our infrastructure to say now we have to ensure that we're securing all of these remote locations and these mobile devices that can just travel anywhere. And our mobile device category is really broad. When we're talking about mobile devices, we are talking about a wide variety of endpoints. They could be tablets, smartphones, laptops, even some of the emerging technologies such as wearables. And they're on a variety of platforms. They may be Windows, they might be an Apple iOS, it could be Android, there could be others, and there's different security models that are associated with each of those platforms. A variety of applications including rich content websites that might use Flash or Java or programs that are being written almost on a daily basis. And there are a variety of transmission methods including wired or wireless, cellular, Bluetooth, RFID, and NFC. So when we start talking about mobile vulnerabilities and how to secure the mobile environment, it's really this incredibly diverse environment that you are coming face to face with. So let's look at some mobile threat scenarios. Our threat scenarios can be carrier-based, they can be operating system-based, they can be application, or they can be endpoint. We have man-in-the-middle attacks that try to steal or intercept data packets. We could have a code exploit, trying to exploit the code. There may be a particular weakness in the code, and that weakness is now exposed, and our attackers are attempting to exploit that. We could have malware and tapjacking. We could have device theft. We could have rooting or jailbreaking. When we root or jailbreak a mobile device, we're really bypassing all of its security controls. We could have the auto-install of potentially unwanted programs. Those are called PUPs. And a potentially unwanted program is one that installs generally either with another program or without the knowledge of the user, understanding what that program's really doing. And then we have exploits of camera and microphone functionality. And these are really just a few of all of the threat scenarios that we could list out in the mobile environment. So OWASP, the organization we went to and looked at last time for the web vulnerabilities, also publishes a top 10 mobile vulnerabilities. And I would suggest that when you're out at the OWASP site, that you also go and look at their top 10 mobile vulnerabilities. And they start with weak server-side controls, then insecure data storage, which means the data that's being stored locally in the device is being stored insecurely. Insufficient transport layer protection, so when we're transmitting data, the protection is not adequate. Unintended data leakage, which means that data may leak out from one application to another. Totally unintended. The user's not trying to do that, obviously. Poor authorization and authentication, so we're not authenticating our users well, and we're not assigning rights and permissions in a strong manner. Broken cryptography. Client-side injection. Security decision via untrusted inputs. Improper session handling, and lack of binary protections. Now, in this lesson, we're not going to go through these, but I do want you to go out to the OWASP site. I want you to read about each of these so that you understand the security implications and the business implications. There are ways to mitigate sort of a wide swath of mobile vulnerabilities, and our options include to identify and protect sensitive data on mobile devices. If at all possible, there should never be sensitive data on your mobile device. But if there is going to be sensitive data on mobile devices, we need to protect it. And most notably, we'll use encryption to protect that data. We want to make sure that we're handling password credentials securely on the device. There are mobile management systems that will allow us to do that. Matter of fact, a number of our applications and our devices actually have pretty decent password credential options, but they're not set by default and they're often bypassed. We need to ensure that sensitive data is protected in transit. So whenever data is being transmitted to a mobile device, we need to ensure that that data is also being encrypted, that it's being protected in transit. We need to vet our applications to prevent data leakage. So we shouldn't allow our users just to install any and all application on their mobile device. That from a security perspective, we should be evaluating those to ensure that we're not going to have any data leakage. We should also be restricting user installations. If it's a company-owned device or even a bring-your-own device, but by policy, we should restrict users from installing any applications on their mobile devices. Certainly, they're not going to be the ones that are going to vet the applications, and they may not understand the consequences of the applications they're installing. We want to implement secure provisioning, distribution, and management of mobile devices, including remote wipe. So if a device is lost or stolen, we have the ability to wipe out everything, personal data, confidential data, sensitive data, everything that's on that device, so that that information does not fall into the wrong hands. Remote computing is its whole other challenge. Remote computing we used to call telecommuting, but now often you might hear it referred to as work from away or work from anywhere. So the challenge of remote or work from away computing is really at a minimum fivefold. One is that we have the lack of traditional technical security protection, such as a corporate firewall or filtering. So when we're working from anywhere, we've extended the boundaries of the organization, but we haven't carried with it the security protections. We also have a lack of the traditional physical security protections. We may not have locked environments. We may not have any surveillance cameras. We certainly don't have access controls to get into the location. When we do work from away, particularly if we're going to be off the network for a period of time, often there's a need for local storage. So now instead of having all of our sensitive or confidential or legally protected data in one place, being protected by controls and then being appropriately archived and retained when it's time to do so, we have this data that sits on local devices. Very often in a remote work from away environment, we're using personal devices, and there may be a mix of personal and business use on those devices. And there's certainly the opportunity for remote devices to distribute malicious code. The remote device, perhaps your laptop, has been connected to a foreign network. You've now picked up some malicious code. You take that same laptop and you bring it back into the corporate environment. You connect it to the network, and now you have become a distribution point for malware. So remote computing vulnerabilities is we need to be thinking about that remote locations should be considered a logical and physical extension of the internal network and secured accordingly. So we need to think about all of these locations where we might have remote computing going on and the type of devices that may be used, and we need to ensure that we're setting up appropriate logical and physical security controls. So we should have administrative controls such as a remote computing policy, standards, agreement, and at best, organizational ownership. It's very problematic, this world that we're living in now of bring your own device or use your own personal device, because it's difficult to have complete control over that device. So our administrative controls, a remote computing policy that sets the parameters, our standards, which are our mandatory implementation specifications, agreements, so that our users know what they're supposed to do and that they have agreed to it in a legally binding contract, and having organizational ownership. We should have technical controls that mimics the internal design and processes. So whatever we have internally for control, whatever we're doing for patch management or for vulnerability management, we should be doing on those remote systems as well. And that we should be establishing secure connections, virtual private network connections, so our connection from the remote location inside to our corporate environment is secure. And we'll be talking at length in the next lessons about VPNs. And we should always have multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is when we have two different types of authentication to verify the identity of the user. And then we should also implement physical controls such as locks and cases. So really what we're doing is we're saying this remote location, this work from home or work from away location, we need to treat in accordance with the same way that we would treat an internal environment. I mentioned doing a remote acceptable use policy. We can have a mobile acceptable use policy as well. Our end users really do need to be educated about mobile and remote computing dangers and their specific responsibilities, including reporting lost or stolen devices. The requirements regarding the use of mobile devices and remote computing should either be included in the organization's acceptable use policy and their agreement, or it could be detailed in a separate agreement. Some organizations would prefer to have those separate because you only have a subset of your users that those are going to apply to. In either case, there should be a signed agreement that says that the user acknowledges their responsibilities. There are two great NIST resources in this area. One is Special Publication 800-124R1, which is Guidelines for Managing the Security of Mobile Devices in the Enterprise. The second is SP 800-114, which is the User's Guide to Securing External Devices for Teleworking and Remote Access. I would strongly encourage you to download both of those, SP 800-124R1 and SP 800-114. Go ahead and read them for the exam to study, but also because they very much enhance your knowledge for the management of mobile devices as well as securing external devices for teleworking and remote access. So that brings us to the end of our lesson and to a review. Our lesson 3.8 review concludes. We talked about mobile and remote system vulnerabilities. We talked about the OWASP Mobile Top 10, and I'm encouraging you very much to go out to owasp.org, look at the Web Vulnerability Top 10, and look at the Mobile Top 10. And we discussed mobile and remote acceptable use policy agreements and the importance of training. And lastly, I showed you two NIST special publications that are related to this topic that I would encourage you to download and study. So we only have 4 terms here that we're going to look at. So man-in-the-middle attack, a tap-jacking attack, jailbreaking, and PUP. So go ahead and take a minute, put me on pause, match these up, and let's see how we do. So man-in-the-middle attack is when a man in the middle steals or intercepts data packets, that the man in the middle is between the two endpoints. Now we'll see that in a mobile or remote environment because often a user might connect to an insecure wireless network or a wireless network that's actually bogus that the man in the middle has set up, and they're able to intercept or steal the data packets. Or a remote worker or a mobile worker has connected to an environment that has already been compromised, and that happens. Tap-jacking is a mobile version of web click-jacking, where when you tap on your phone, sometimes the system will set up to automatically tap. In web click-jacking, which we didn't discuss, that's where your system is set up to automatically click on links or advertisements in order to increase the click count, and in a click-per-pay environment, that's going to make money for the attacker. Tap-jacking really does the same thing in a mobile environment, where instead of where you would click on the web, you actually tap with your fingers, so it sets up a tap-jacking environment. Jailbreaking was when a device hack results in unrestricted access. Remember, when you jailbreak, you bypass all of your security controls. And PUP is programs that secretly change settings, so potentially unwanted programs is a PUP. So let's end this lesson with some CISSP exam tips. That rooting or jailbreaking a mobile device circumvents the security controls and also circumvents encryption protections. Remote location should be considered a logical and physical extension of the internal network and should be secured accordingly. And VPNs and multi-factor authentication should be implemented for remote connectivity. So thank you very much for joining me for this lesson, and I look forward to seeing you in the next.